to marry and have children. In contrast, people who are unhealthy, people who are alcoholics, or who have mental illnesses, will try and make sure they don't get to marry, or will sterilize them, or will make sure that their children don't live. And that will prevent our race from becoming weaker. So that's kind of the idea here. So this, you can see, this really justifies imperialism and racism to a large extent. So any questions there? Good. I'm going to move a little fast. That's one reason I'm recording it, because we still have quite a bit more to do. So there's this question, how did British slavery end? I had a list of 6 things, right? People who don't profit from slavery see it and are horrified. They convince institutions to forbid members from holding slaves. Remember, institutions can live forever as long as people keep joining them, whereas people die, so it's really important to get an institution to support you. These institutions led to the establishment of new institutions dedicated to combating slavery. They spread from the United States to Britain. In Britain, these institutions got with the government, lobbied the parliament, which then outlawed slavery. And then Britain used its power to eradicate the slave trade and slavery itself. And what's important about this to a large extent, I just want to point out a couple things. You had people like this man, Olida Equiano. Remember, he was a freed slave. He was a freed slave. And you had people, is he not on there? Oh yeah, John Newton. There, John Newton, the guy who wrote Amazing Grace, started off as a slave person who went around as a slave trader. He later converted to Christianity and wrote Amazing Grace, but he still practiced slavery for a while because he said, well, slaves don't know what freedom is, so it's okay to enslave them because you can't take away something from someone if they don't know what it is. And later on, though, and possibly because of the influence of, but then you had people like Olida Equiano who said, well, I was a slave, I knew what liberty was, I knew what freedom was, I knew it had been taken away from me. He learns English, he writes this excellent book. And so he influences people like John Newton who say, okay, slavery's wrong, we need to stop doing it. Because you have freed slaves getting up and saying, this is terrible what you're doing to us. And people like Newton will say, you're right, we need to stop. Because Newton eventually does get the right idea. Now, why did Europeans engage in imperialism? Someone asked, what is imperialism? For the course, it's complex, but for our course, it just means coming in and taking power in someone else's country. Right? You have one country expanding its power into another country. For our sake, that's what we're going to use as our definition. It's a little simplistic, but that'll work for us. Well, here's the picture that was associated with it. Remember, first of all, the Europeans are able to do this because they have these revolutions, right? They have nationalism, they have democracy, they have the Industrial Revolution, scientific, industrial, and economic revolutions, political revolutions that give them a lot of power. Well, an industrial economy needs raw materials. If you want to make cars, you need rubber. You can only get rubber in it's hard. Places to get rubber include Africa, for example. So you want to get control over rubber supplies in Africa so you can keep making cars. So you need raw materials. Also, you need a place to sell those cars. So you want you want access to markets where you can sell your cars. There was also a desire to spread ideas. Some people said it's our duty to form an empire so we can spread Christianity. Right? You saw that with the Philippines. We need to take the Philippines so we can bring Christianity. We need to make the people civilized, and we can take, we're in a social Darwinism. We're in a conflict between different groups of people. Whoever wins is going to, whoever wins this contest, social Darwinism, right? Survival of the fittest. I can come in, I'm fit, I'm powerful, I can come in and take African land, so it's okay for me to do it. The Africans should have defended themselves better. And also strategic reasons. Basically, military reasons. You want this place, for example, Japan wanted Korea because of its strategic military importance. And there was also competition that people wanted to have colonies because other people wanted them, right? The United States said, well, we need colonies because European countries have colonies, and we don't want those Europeans to be ahead of us. Okay, how were biological concepts of race used to justify imperialism in Africa? Social Darwinism, right? The Africans are racially inferior to us, so it's okay for us to take over their countries and take their stuff. But how did the battles of Isandlwana and Ottawa challenge those ideas? Remember, at Isandlwana, the Zulus defeated a large British force. Even though the Zulus didn't have advanced weapons, they were so organized and so disciplined that they were able to defeat the British. If the Zulus had the Industrial Revolution, and they never did, if they had the Industrial Revolution, they could have won the war. They could have defended themselves from the British and avoid colonization. But the key thing was, they're not racially inferior. They were brave, disciplined people. If they would have had modern weapons and a modern economy, the Zulus would have done just fine. The Battle of Adwa, remember, that's the Ethiopians. That's a case where the Ethiopians don't just win a battle, they also win the war. In that case, the Italians invaded Ethiopia. The Ethiopians had some modern weapons and defeated the Italians. So Africans were quite capable of using modern weapons if they had them. So there wasn't anything racially inferior about Africans. They just had not had the opportunity to go through the Industrial Revolution. And I showed you how that's very difficult to actually have one. How does Babar justify the colonization of Africa? You just did a paper on it. How does it?
That the Europeans came and it's made them civilized.
Exactly, civilization, right? We can come in and take over Africa because we will spread civilization, and the Africans won't mind. Right? Babar, he sees that people are walking around on 2 feet and wearing clothes, and he just says, okay, I'll do that too. Right? He just instantly, peacefully accepts Western civilization because it seems so superior. I mean, I'm not saying it is, but that's the book's perspective. Right? So they're civilized. We want to, it says that it justifies colonization by saying this will help Africans become civilized, and they'll be happy, and they will like it, and they won't resist at all. They'll be happy with it. Number 5, we tolerate. I mean, briefly, it's the political, it's the scientific, industrial, and political revolutions that make the colonization of Africa possible, not race. What were the different ways Africans experienced imperialism? Okay. Blaise Diagne, was his experience of imperialism positive or negative? Positive, right? Remember, he's the guy who was elected to the French Parliament. He was an African who was elected to the French Parliament. Right? So for him, it was positive. One example, Leopold. This issue of markets, getting rubber. Leopold was the king of Belgium, and he wanted to have rubber, and he had this African colony that had lots of rubber, so he enslaved Africans to get the rubber. Right, so that's one experience, right? We're just going to, Blaise Diagne had a very positive experience. The Africans living in Leopold's colony had a very negative experience because they were basically, many of them were enslaved. It's not on here, but the Herero were killed by the Germans because the Germans wanted their land. So they said, well, we're just going to get rid of you, right? They drive them into a desert and let them die. So that's a third kind. That's a second, Blaise Diagne is very positive, enjoying European civilization. Under Leopold, you have these people becoming enslaved. Under these Germans, you have people being killed directly in that way. Just being killed to take their land. So let's see. So that's 3. Perfect not question. Okay, how did British policy in India change? You can kind of think of this as a 3-step process. Remember, at first they come to trade. Right? In the 1600s, they come to trade, so you have tolerance. But then remember, that's in the 1600s. Then remember, the Mughal Empire starts to break down. And then you have, so there's civil war. There's fighting among the different people living in India. And that leads some people like Robert Clive to go out and conquer parts of India. And then the East India Company moves from being simply a trading company, simply being merchants, to a government. Right? So you have this switch to a government from trade. So the British increasingly, under the East India Company, engage in government. And there they have an idea to change India. Right? We need to civilize India. We need to Christianize India. We need to fix India. There's something wrong with it. The Indians resist, and that leads to the 1857 mutiny or rebellion, which is question number 8, and that leads back to this policy of tolerance. They put down the rebellion very bloodily, but once they put it down, they say, okay, we will now go back to this old policy of tolerance. So first it's like, hey, let's tolerate India in the name of trade. Okay, now we're governing India. We have a duty to change India to make them civilized and Christianized. Oh, the Indians rebelled. I guess we better tolerate them. and their religion and their civilization. Now, what benefits did British imperialism bring to India, and what problems did it cause? I'm going to go really fast. There's the positive aspects, right? Strong state, more peace and order, more schools, modern infrastructure, restricted sati, improvements in health service, sanitation, basis for modern democracy and economy. Lots of good things. But remember, what was the video I showed you about? What happened in the video? I think they had a famine, and lots of people starved. Right? So there was also negative things. The big problem was Indians were second-class subjects in their own country. The benefits that the British brought the Indians were meant to benefit the British primarily. And India developed not in accordance with Indian needs, but with British needs. Right? The example I gave was the British used taxes raised in India to conquer Burma, which was not necessarily the Indians' best interest. It was in the British best interest. So it's a mixture of positive and negative things. You can't say it's wholly positive, you can't say it's wholly negative. It's both. But the one key thing is it's mixed, but it exists. The problem is it's usually the British who are getting the benefits, and it's the Indians who are paying the costs. Okay, imperialism in China and Japan. Oh, real quick. We didn't have time to go over Chu Jin. You can mark her off. We'll talk about her later. We'll start with her. What internal, external problems did the Qing Empire face? Okay, remember I said that there were basically three major problems: foreign pressure, internal disorder and rebellion, and an inability to effectively reform. So let's see. So what was the internal problem? Well, internal problem, remember they were losing the mandate of heaven. People were suspicious because in the 1800s there weren't enough food to go around, there wasn't enough resources to go around. Chinese people expect their government to take care of them as part of the mandate of heaven. The government was failing to do that, so the people started questioning it. That was a major thing. Then remember the British started bringing in opium. The British were putting pressure on the Chinese because they wanted to trade. So the British started bringing in opium to trade, and that led to the Opium War. So the Chinese are under pressure from foreign wars, from people who want to gain power in China. And then, like I said, there's that problem with the food. And you'll recall, then you also had that Christian rebellion, right? Hong Xiuquan and Taiping lead this rebellion against China in order to, and that leads to a problem. So they have foreign wars, and they have internal rebellions, and they have people who are questioning the government. Now, why did the Qing Empire reject the scientific, industrial, and political revolution that made the West so powerful? Remember, I gave you all these examples, but the key thing I would like you to remember, the old system had worked very well. The old Qing system had worked or the Chinese system had worked very well. And also remember, these revolutions would threaten the power of the elites. They gained power through the old Confucian exams that emphasized moral knowledge over technical knowledge. No one had elected the Manchus or Qing, and the Qing Empire was a multi-ethnic empire. So nationalism threatened it, democracy threatened it, and science and industrial revolution threatened it. So it didn't make sense to adopt it, because adopting it would destroy the power of the Manchus who ruled the Qing, as well as from the Chinese elites who gained power from Confucianism. Last one real quick, Rama IV is connected to that question, how was Thailand able to maintain its independence? Rama IV was a Thai king who favored modernization. Right? He was a Thai king who favored modernization. Thank you for your patience. Good luck. I'll get this up online as soon as possible, and I'll see you all on Wednesday. Wow.